Here in the Crisis Command Centre, 3 people who've never met will be put in an extraordinary position of power as they take over the reins of government and run this country during a simulated national emergency. They have volunteered to be ministers, and tonight they'll discover if they've got what it takes to survive at the very top. They are Andrew Morris, chairman of Earl's Court in Olympia.
Evacuation is a huge mistake, Carmel. We have to seal the hospital. It's harsh, but it's the right thing to do.
Carmel McConnell, activist and founder of the children's charity Magic Breakfast.
I would not go to sleep tonight thinking that we had sentenced 3,000 people, including mothers and children, to certain death.
And Sahar Hashemi, co-founder of Coffee Republic.
I think evacuation, I do worry about creating a death chamber.
The ministers will not be alone in making their decisions. Helping them will be 3 genuine experts with real-life experience of crisis management. They are Sir Tim Garden, military advisor; Amanda Platell, communications; and Charles Shoebridge, emergency services. We have a national emergency, and it's about to begin. Ministers, you've been brought here today because we have a potential crisis on our hands. There's been an outbreak of a suspicious illness in Liverpool, and I'd like to take you immediately to a news report.
27 patients have been quarantined in an emergency isolation ward at St Mark's Hospital in Liverpool. 6 others are in intensive care. They're all said to be very poorly and suffering severe flu-like symptoms. Health officials fear if the infection is contagious, this could be the start of an epidemic.
Doctors say they don't know the cause of the outbreak and insist the quarantine is just a precaution. They're appealing to GPs to be on the lookout for patients suffering from high temperatures, headaches and nausea.
OK, so what do we know?
I think we have to draw on the experience of what happened in the Far East last year with SARS, clearly, and the fact that this started off as what is supposedly a contained situation, and then it exploded in their faces because they reacted too slowly.
And maybe we should find out, first of all, whether all these people work together, whether they were all in a hospital or a school, whether they came from a specific building, in a way.
Exactly.
There might be hope, I mean...
Ministers, I do have a senior consultant from St Mark's Hospital in Liverpool, and I'd like to connect you immediately to the hospital.
All 27 of the patients we've admitted have severe flu-like symptoms, fever, nausea. 6 of the patients are in the hospital's infectious disease unit. They're very weak and have problems breathing. We've taken samples from the patients and we've sent them to the Health Protection Agency and to the government research labs at Porton Down. I've asked them to contact you as soon as they've analysed the samples.
So, Ministers, we have 6 people quarantined. It might be helpful also for you to hear from the registrar at the hospital.
OK.
To be safe, we are dealing with this incident as a Category 1 biohazard, so all emergency services personnel should be wearing chemical protection suits. The trouble is we don't have enough at the moment. We have supplies of gloves, masks and gowns, which would be sufficient in the short term, but they might not be enough to protect us properly.
Ministers, as you've heard, there are obviously some very sick people up there, and there are going to be certain risks in treating them, and I think the hospital will be looking for some guidance from you. And the first issue for you to decide is this: do you want to wait for more chemical protection suits to arrive before treating these patients? Do you want to ask for volunteers to treat these patients, or do you want to order staff to treat these patients? With each dilemma the ministers face, they must choose the correct option as decided by a team of professional crisis managers. The ministers can call upon their expert advisors at any time.
So can we ask about these chemical suits first? Because they should arrive ASAP. Where are they?
Minister, there are 10 suits available at this hospital. That's in addition to those that are routinely in use at the infectious diseases unit that you've heard about. The problem is, of course, that we've got far too many patients at the moment to be dealt with properly by staff who are just protected wearing 10 suits. The issue is what we now do about that. You've got some suits coming in from elsewhere, but the estimated time of arrival for those is between 1 and 2 hours, is what we've heard so far.
1 to 2 hours. That's quite long.
What do we know about where this kind of problem has happened before in the world? What's the best practice?
One word answers your
know
question,
it's
Ministers,
virus?
which is containment, is the answer to your
Right,
question in a word. That is always best practice, as you alluded to a moment ago, Minister.
Thank you. Shall we come to the decision?
Yeah, I have to say, this is
Waiting for the chemical suit.
This is a time issue.
Yes, it is.
Above all, again, I was out in the Far East during the SARS crisis, and one of the big issues were that the staff, the nursing staff, failed to treat the patients, and they left.
Spread.
Absolutely. I think the third option, which is ordering the staff to treat these patients, is the only option that we can take.
But what if it's dangerous and the staff are going to fall ill as well? I mean, the 1 or 2 hours is not going to make a difference as long as containment is important.
1 or 2 hours will make a difference. I mean, we are seeing people very, very ill here, and the advice we're getting is that these people may well die if we don't treat them. It's a matter of public confidence at the moment. The media is crawling all over this story, as you've seen already. If we don't treat, I mean, since when have we had people in the NHS that aren't treated? I mean, that's what it's for. We treat sick people in the NHS. We can't turn these people away.
Can we not treat them with the 10 suits we've got already? Because if it's...
I think we're barking up the wrong tree. I think it's the nursing staff's responsibility to treat those patients, and they have to be ordered to do so.
Exactly.
Let me find out exactly where you stand. We have to take this decision pretty quickly.
I think
what do you think is the right thing?
Should we order anyone? It should be we wait for the suits, and if a
You'll wait
volunteer
for the
want to
suits,
go in...
Minister?
I would order the staff in.
Order the staff?
And I would not order. I would assume that there are volunteers who are highly trained and that they are taking personal risks.
Ministers, you are running this crisis.
We have three options with three decisions here.
I'll leave you a very short space of time. You need to come to a consensus.
You're getting caught up on the subjective word of ordering people. We will ask people to come forward to go in.
I'm not being caught up on that. I'm really believing, and let's just get clarification, the volunteers, I believe, are just as good as the nurses and doctors that we would order, that they are as skilled, but they are taking a personal choice. And I think that kind of forcing people...
Guys, by the time we're
let us
arguing
just
this,
check. I agree with Charles. It is our duty to take a fast decision with the best people without pushing people who may not feel that they're taking the risk.
I totally agree with the pushing.
Ministers, you're taking incredible time, and they need guidance. You've got it right, I think, Minister, that we've got to contain this problem. Let's treat them, and let's use the right people to treat them.
But why are the volunteers the wrong people? That's what I want to know.
Well, how long are we going to take to get people to volunteer through this process?
No. The assumption is... Can I just ask a question?
Charles, maybe
Sorry, may I just ask one question? I'm working on the basis that the volunteers are there and mobilisable now. If they're not, then I will go... Then I agree.
Of course they're there, but let's do it. This is a normal hospital. Let's get this problem contained.
Can we get the volunteers in straight away?
Can people going in there because you're spreading it with so infectious?
That treated.
Can we get the volunteers in straight away?
If you make your decision, Minister, we will immediately instruct the hospital to ask for volunteers.
OK, that answers the question. That is the question. We've got a lead time that is going to mean that we can't do it. If the volunteers are there... If the hospital has to ask for volunteers to go in, I think we have to then order people, because the time is running out right now. I will go with my first instinct, which is to kind of get people in.
This is a health crisis. You know, this is not something... this is not policy that can be debated over hours. You have to take a decision here.
OK,
Sahar, we have to take the situation under control. Waiting for the chemical suits isn't an option. Why? Because we have no guarantee what time they will show up and how many there will be.
In an hour?
We don't know that. That is not in our hands. At the moment, we have...
Surely as a country we should have some power to get the chemical suits over as quickly as
we need a decision. I will take a majority decision. Unanimity, of course, is better. Listen, where do you stand?
My strong recommendation to my colleagues is we have to order the staff to treat these patients because they're best equipped to handle the situation as it is now.
You want to order the staff, Minister?
Yeah. Having learned that the volunteers will take time, I now believe that because we have to save lives, we have to get staff ordered in to treat people now.
Minister?
But I'll go with the majority.
Ministers, you have taken your first decision, and it will be enacted. According to our panel of crisis management experts, ordering staff to treat the patients is not the right decision. Health guidelines state that during a crisis, vital health workers should never be put at risk. The correct decision is to wait for more chemical protection suits to arrive. As staff at St Mark's Hospital monitor the progress of this unknown disease, emergency services in Liverpool are preparing for the worst. Now, on the ground in Merseyside, there's a police commander who's in charge of events there, and I'd like to take you over to Merseyside right away.
The emergency services have been put on full alert. Our first aim is to identify contaminated areas and cordon them off. We also are preparing decontamination tents and temporary quarantine centres in case they're required. If we're looking at a major health scare, we really don't have enough personnel in Liverpool to deal with this incident.
Well, Ministers, you can see what the incident commander is doing there. He clearly wants more resources, and it's up to you to decide what is the appropriate scale of response to this. Do you want just to use Liverpool emergency services, or do you want at this stage to start bringing in from elsewhere in the UK other emergency services, or do you want to call in the army?
Gut feel for me is that we do need to bring some more people in. That guy sounded very stretched.
100% agree with you. Other emergency services immediately?
This is an emergency services issue. We have an emergency services advisor.
We have a feeling that it is best to bring in additional resources. Could we get your view, please?
I don't think there's any doubt about that, Minister. You heard the police chief himself say much the same thing. Emergency services support comes from surrounding regions. You take the let's say, a small proportion of the emergency services surrounding, not just the police, but the ambulance and the hospital staff too, and supplement the Liverpool resources.
We all agree, let's do that.
Can I just ask Sir Tim, your view, is there any great benefit if we bring in army at this stage?
Of course there is, Minister. The army is your spare resource. All of these other emergency services are there for emergencies and may be needed later. You've got the army, you set up contingency reserves of TA 2 years ago against these sorts of disasters. They're reservists and they'll take about 24 hours to get in. But army manpower is available for all the myriad of tasks that you might get.
Right.
Amanda, doesn't that create panic with the army coming in?
Ministerial instincts are absolutely right. I mean, not only does it create panic, but you look at what happened at Heathrow when the tanks were brought in.
Right,
First of all, there's panic, and secondly, you look ridiculous because you've overreacted.
Right.
So, guys, should we get the other emergency services ASAP?
Minister, before you come to a decision and reject the army, just remember that we have protective kit in great quantity, which is not true for the specialist emergency services. They don't need it every day. You have a resource there which you'll be able to call upon in the event that things get out of hand.
We would like the army to be on standby. We're not taking them into the front line right now, but we would like the army to be on standby where they have protective suits or particularly useful expertise. Please, can you ask them to be closely working with the
army
police?
are on standby all the time. I can get you forces relatively rapidly, and they'll build up over a period of time. What I'm asking you for is the authority to deploy them where you need them now.
I'm asking you to deploy them, if I've got agreement with my colleagues, I'm asking you to deploy the chemical suits, I'm asking you to deploy the expertise from the army, not to have people visible on the streets at this time.
I'm afraid you can't split the kit from the people, Minister.
I can agree with Sir Tim on this, Minister. The army are trained with army kit, the police have police kit, and really you can't start swapping kit about, I have to say.
Swapping kit. OK,
so
we just need to make sure we get
at the moment, since we're so short of time, does everyone agree that we get the emergency services?
I think that given that the local people have said that they can't cope,
we have to get them in.
We have to go for the UK emergency
should we get Gavin? Do we agree?
I think we can make the decision today. Are we happy with that?
Yeah.
Ministers, I understand. I think I can bring you an update on the latest figures of those people who are affected in Liverpool. You should hear this.
Thank you.
Ministers, I've just heard from St Mark's, and the Liverpool NHS Trust wants to release the following statement to the media. 45 people have now been admitted with probable symptoms. 16 people are now in intensive care, and I'm afraid one person, a 39-year-old male, has just died.
Thank you.
Gosh.
So we are dealing with an epidemic.
There is just one issue you obviously should think about, Ministers. Of course, if you do call emergency services from elsewhere, there is an issue of perhaps depleting those resources. Should this contagion spread? Should it escalate? Yes.
Thank you. It's a good point, well made. However,
I mean, we know we're going to get
your feeling, Andrew?
Eventually.
I think we've made the right decision. History always shows us that failure to react quickly always tends to hit you later.
Absolutely.
And I think we under the circumstances, we have the one option to go for.
All right, Ministers, what is it you've agreed?
We've agreed to...
The extra emergency services.
The UK,
From elsewhere
the UK
in the
emergency services.
And on this, you're all agreed together?
We are.
Yes, we're all agreed.
Well, we have unanimity. Ministers, I will ensure your decision has been enacted. Calling in emergency services from elsewhere in the UK is the wrong decision. The rate of infection and the deadly potential of this mystery illness requires extreme measures. Our crisis management experts agree that in this case, the army would be mobilised. The ministers have made their second incorrect decision. As the numbers of infected patients rise and the death toll increases within the infectious disease unit, the rest of the hospital is still operating normally. Now, I'd like to take you over to Porton Down, the government's research laboratory.
We have a preliminary identification from the Liverpool samples. We can't be 100% sure at this point, but we think we are looking at the bacterium Yersinia pestis. It's commonly known as bubonic plague. We should be able to confirm if it is plague within an hour.
God almighty.
Oh, no.
Right. Let's first of all...
Those are early indications.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the first assessment. It doesn't necessarily mean that that is exactly what we are dealing with here.
Right. Could I ask, is there any link at all to any kind of terrorism around the world? Are we seeing any other incidents similar to Liverpool anywhere in the world at the moment?
Ministers, although plague actually does naturally occur, and you get cases each year in America and the like, we have a standard procedure that we work on the worst case that it could be terrorism. The thing that really worries me, Minister, from my side is that during the Cold War, the Soviet Union was experimenting with genetically modified plague and other biowarfare agents. A lot of that stuff is unaccounted for, and it's been a worry to the security services for a long time. So let's just keep our minds open.
Sure.
We still don't have a confirmed plague,
Yes.
of course.
When was the last recorded incident of plague?
There were half a dozen last year in America. I mean, they occur
But they were
naturally.
contained. They managed to contain them in America.
They were natural occurrences.
How have they managed to contain them?
Actually, plague is treatable. Antibiotics will bring the death rate down to about 7%. I mean, that's still fairly high, but as long as you get antibiotics within 24 hours.
Ministers, I think there's a further update on the figures as regards what's happening up in Liverpool.
Yes, just first, Minister, we now have 2 deaths in St Mark's. 19 are in intensive care, several of them on respirators, and the total of infected with these symptoms is 74.
Now, Ministers, immediately I'd like to connect you back to the registrar at St Mark's Hospital.
There's been a very important development in the diagnosis of this outbreak. We aren't seeing the red swellings under the arms and in the groin area, which would be the usual telltale signs of a case of bubonic plague. We can't be sure, but we think what we are dealing with is a far more serious incident of pneumonic plague. This form of the disease is highly contagious. We believe that some of the medical personnel who've been working on the wards have also been infected.
The key thing that came across there, Minister, was that they're suggesting that it's pneumonic rather than bubonic plague. I'm getting Porton Down to give me a readout on the effects of that.
Ministers, I've got the consultant who's also in the hospital on a video link, and I think it would be a good thing to hear immediately from her.
The patients with plague are being held in isolation wards. We're doing everything we can for them. But we're worried that the other patients who don't have plague symptoms now might catch the disease. They'd be safer if we could evacuate them to other hospitals. Also, we need to know whether the hospital staff can come and go or not.
OK, Ministers, you need to take a decision about evacuation in the light of what you've just heard. And the question for you to decide is this. Would you like to evacuate the non-plague patients? Or would you like to evacuate the non-plague patients and those staff who don't have the plague? Or do you, at this point, want to seal the hospital?
Well, OK.
I'm afraid I have to say that I stand for sealing the hospital because the people already in there must have been infected.
This is, I think, an easy decision for us to take. The non-plague patients may be infected, but they haven't yet shown symptoms.
That's right, which is
and you have to seal the hospital off and isolate it totally.
It's very, very harsh, but...
Sealing the hospital, it will have major implications, and I'm just wondering, in terms of the evacuation...
How it would happen.
Yeah, exactly.
The vast majority of these people are not infected. If you can evacuate in a way that can assure to a large degree that these people will be kept isolated, we take them out to a secure area. It means then that you'll be able to save some of your staff, and also you'll be saving lives, because the longer people stay in there, the more people are going to die. That's the problem.
So where can we take them?
Let me understand clearly how pneumonic plague is actually spread.
I've got the information, right. Minister, and it's not good news. It's spread by droplets in your breath, by coughing, sneezing, up to 2 meters from anybody who's got it. It's very highly infectious. The mortality rate, if you're not treated, is just about 100%, as near as makes no difference. That treatment we were talking about, using antibiotics, only reduces that to perhaps 50%. I have to say that your priority must be to contain this disease. Absolutely. And sealing in this case, because of the aerosol problem, means taping windows, sealing the hospital in totality. I don't see any other safe way forward at the moment.
How many patients and how many staff are actually in that hospital?
I think Amanda's probably got those figures.
Minister, I've just got the figures through. There's 950 beds, and most of them are occupied. Of course, there were visitors there as well. We don't know exactly how many were there. And the staff, it's got a total of nearly 5,000 staff, but we estimate about 3,000 people are in the hospital at the moment.
Carmen, what is it you think?
The evacuation process can't be 100% seal-proof, but my gut feel is 3,000 people in a hospital, we are condemning 3,000 people to die of the plague unless we get some evacuation.
I agree with you.
I think, given the circumstances and the escalation and the high degree of contagious potential through droplets at 2 metres, we have to seal it until we can actually assess all of that information.
But if you just turn them all into a bus and take them to safe haven all together, at least you're lessening the risk of them just being, you know, every day being infected, just kind of every hour if it's so contagious.
But potentially you're spreading it to another location.
But hopefully, as Charles said, there might be a safe location to take them to so they have no contact with anyone else. There surely are...
I'm listening to your discussion, Minister, but let's think what you're actually proposing if you take them off. It may sound very humane and the like, but actually you've got no way of screening them. The people who are infected without showing symptoms for 24 hours, so they can infect other people. So what you're doing is producing, in wherever you send off to Charles's isolation place, another hospital that is going to be full, almost bound to be full, of people who are infected who haven't yet displayed symptoms.
And the word used before was containment. And the only way to contain, harsh though it is to seal that hospital. I don't see there's any other option at all.
Well, if we can... Right now, we're probably going to get another update on a death, aren't we?
No, Minister, you're not. I'm just staggered at what you're saying there, Minister. I mean, you're saying you seem to think there's no alternative to this. This has got a huge maternity ward in it, this hospital. There are dozens of women pregnant, dozens of newborn babies in there. You know, you would be sealing those people to an almost certain death. Sealing in people who aren't even sick. That's the thing. You're talking about, it's so emotive. You've got mothers there, you've got young babies, you've got babies in incubators, completely untouched by this disease. And I can promise you, the media coverage on it would be absolutely terrible. There'd be pictures of the hospital sealed up, death hospital, and you would be the death ministers.
In Hong Kong, this was tracked to a particular apartment building in Kowloon. And although Hong Kong got the bad publicity and all the repercussions of that, in actual fact, there was no outbreaks whatsoever on the actual island at all. Beyond it, because they sealed that building. I think it's tough, but I think it's the most responsible way to go.
Thank you. I have a very strong feeling that it is the wrong thing to seal the hospital, simply because 3,000... I would not go to sleep tonight thinking that we had sentenced 3,000 people, including mothers and children, to certain death. I understand exactly that we mustn't risk spreading it, but I really think let's evacuate those we can.
Our responsibility lies to the nation, and that means containment, and that means we have to seal.
Can I persuade you, actually, comment on what Andrew's saying, is that because what will happen if you do evacuate them, these people are likely to become ill, you know, a couple of them anyway, the way this plague is going, and they're still going to need medical attention, so you are going to double the problem.
Well, I think I would stay with what I'm saying. I think that sealing up immediately is like going out to the public and saying we have no contingency, we in the government do not have the ability to handle this crisis apart from declare it a complete no-go.
If we evacuate, the Sun headline is government takes pneumonic plague to the people. We cannot do that.
The government, as Amanda just said...
the army in and have...
Hold it, Ministers, here. You've got to decide on the options that are before you. So what is it to be here?
I'd say evacuate. I realise it's a horrible call.
Evacuate the non-plague patients. Minister.
Evacuation's a huge mistake, Carl. We have to seal the hospital. It's harsh, but it's the right thing to do.
Minister, your two other ministers disagree. What do you think is the right thing to do?
I think evacuation. I do worry about creating a death chamber.
OK. Ministers, we don't have unanimity here, but your decision will be enacted.
Evacuating the non-plague patients is the wrong decision. It risks spreading the highly contagious pneumonic plague to other locations. The correct decision is to seal the hospital with everyone inside. At this stage in the crisis, the ministers have done nothing to prevent the spread of the plague, with 3 incorrect and no correct decisions. The minister's decision to evacuate the hospital soon proves to be misguided. Due to a lack of resources, the evacuation is chaotic and dangerous. Health authorities abandon the attempt, and a decision is taken to seal the hospital.
Now, I think at this stage I can connect you straight back to Porton Down.
We've confirmed that the bacteria is definitely a strain of plague. According to the DNA test results, it isn't a strain that we've seen in this country before. We're currently running tests to see if it's resistant to various forms of antibiotic.
Ministers, now that you know that this is a highly contagious and dangerous disease, you have to decide what to tell the country. Do you announce plague? Britain has the plague. Do you announce Britain has a contagious disease? Or do you at this stage say nothing?
My gut feel is honesty in this situation, although it's hard, is the best policy. I know it's a horrible word. It is one of those things, but I think with the
Honesty
foot and mouth,
isn't a horrible word.
Well, honesty, the plague is a horrible word. It terrifies me personally. If we're looking at the foot and mouth and looking at BSE, governments in the past have not stood up and said, this is what this is, and we're taking it very seriously and putting all our resources
But don't you think if we announce contagious disease, number one, we've alerted people as to the dangers. I mean, it's already, this is headline news. So I think we do have to, do we all agree that the third option, say nothing,
I think we should strike out
there.
the third option.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, of saying nothing.
Yes, absolutely, I agree.
We have to say
how we communicate.
So guys, imagine you're watching the news, and this is headline news, as we see. There's probably kind of your news reports the whole time about this. So let's say it's just contagious, because at least people will be alerted it's contagious. They know it's bad.
Yeah.
So why tell them
I'm afraid,
even worse
ministers,
when we haven't contained it?
The latest update from St Mark's is 83 people have now been isolated with pneumonic plague. 26 are in intensive care, and 3 people have now died.
Oh, God. Can we get your advice on this thing? Were we to say, and my gut instinct is honesty is good, is if we were to stand up and say, it is plague, we are doing everything we can to contain this, what do you believe will be the next stage of public reaction?
Well,
Should we say
Every
that?
single person who can get out of the country will try and get out.
So
I mean,
the
it'll be
consequences
headline
are-
news everywhere.
if
Every
we
news
say-
bulletin will be saying Britain is in the grip of the plague.
OK, if we say contagious disease in Liverpool, what do you feel would be the next stage of the
Well,
public
it'd be
reaction?
much more scaled down. There'd be a lot of speculation.
And people will be aware.
You wouldn't have that immediate
That's
kind of
right.
knee-jerk.
Right.
Precisely, give
in
true
your-
information, but don't shy away from this plague word, because if you don't give details, of course, everybody else is going to speculate. If you announce the specific disease, of course, you could then give reassurance regarding that. You could, for example, advise people to stay in their homes. You could tell them it's the best way to save their lives. That way you could prevent all this mass panic.
I mean, I really don't think we should make a plague announcement. I feel quite strongly by that. I think the news media is doing enough to create panic. People are very, very aware. I'm sure people are already quite panicked. We are leaders of this country. We have to go there with assurance. We don't feel confident about the plague. We haven't got it under control. It's a mess for us.
And couched with this announcement will be a chief medical officer recommendation. We can't just say, here we have a potentially very
It's a
serious
contagious
situation.
disease. It's contagious.
The public will be looking to our leadership as to how they should react to it. Should they go and leave the country? Should the area of Liverpool within
Can I just...
circumference be isolated?
I think, ministers, on this, we have to have a decision.
OK, my gut feeling is that we should say contagious disease, that we shouldn't say plague. I know that we do know that we are likely to be dealing with a form of plague. I know that honesty is the best policy. My gut feel is that we're going to make the situation worse.
You want to announce contagious disease, Minister?
I'm pretty torn.
Yeah,
I think that...
Well, we can't be torn for too long.
There's a benefit in saying the plague.
The one concern I have got is the media being the media. There's 3,000 people here who are probably going to hear about this situation firsthand in the close quarters of that hospital. The potential for it to leak is very strong. And if we announce contagious disease now, and within a matter of hours, there's a story that it is plague, we would have been seen to have deceived.
All right, Minister.
I don't think that will be deception. I don't think
My instincts are to probably go with the plague news, but to couch it with responsible
The word
action.
plague coming from the government itself will create hysteria, because you're actually rubber stamping. This is the worst thing that could happen
in terms
to
of
people.
potential damage, we have been told pretty much it's definitely plague, OK? UK officials have been told 3,000 people in that hospital in direct cause are probably bound to know sooner rather than later.
It's a word that's spread around. It's not an official statement
But I think
yet.
we can couch it with the recommendation that this affects the local area at the present time. There is no need to panic on a regional basis.
People, do you think we're in panic if you say there's no need to panic? We haven't even contained it yet. I'm saying contagious, so at least you can take the kind of measures to contain it to that extent.
You opened with the word honesty?
Yeah.
It's not honesty, it's being leader in a nation that is going through a real crisis at the moment.
May I just say, I absolutely think honesty is the right policy, but I think there's no particular benefit to the average member of the population knowing that it's plague versus contagious disease.
I have to interrupt you. Yeah. This is a clear decision.
Yes.
You either mention plague or you don't. And which is it?
Come on, you can't mention plague.
I think gut feel, overall, I say honesty. I say honesty. If we have to face it, we have to face it. I think I am changing my mind, just because I think that the experience of previous governments has been that they've hedged and they've hoped, and I think we
How will that help anyone to know it's the plague? How will that help the nation? How will that help someone sitting in London, sitting in other cities?
I'll tell you. In a circumstance such as this, trust is the most important weapon that we have.
And what are we going to do down the line?
You need to be taking action. You need to be preventing it. You need to be containing it.
With 3,000 people and the officials knowing, do you believe it's a probability that within a matter of hours that will be out there in the media with that amount of people?
No, not necessarily.
Do you accept that?
It might be in the media, but people will see it as a speculation.
It will be in the public domain.
Yes, it will be, but if we make an official statement about it, it's a whole different issue. We're not even dealing with it properly.
We'll have been seen to be transparent. And we couch it with our recommendations. It's a local situation at the present time. There'll be hotlines, there'll be news flashes, there'll be information. Let's keep a flow of information out there.
Everyone's going to be flooding into hospitals, having themselves checked. I mean, literally, everyone's going to get so worried about the plague. All the emergency services will be dealing with people's hysteria.
If it's exposed that we didn't announce it with the knowledge of it, we'll be resigning tomorrow.
I can't imagine. I think I would like to lead the...
All right, Ministers, we need to wrap this up.
I feel
you've already changed your mind. What?
I have to say that because I think that we have a duty of honesty first, even though I think that
leadership. You have a duty of keeping the country together, not a duty of honesty.
Yeah, I think that in very simple terms, we have to say plague and manage it proactively with the right resources. It is the very hardest thing.
You're doubling up your work. You guys realise that once we announce plague, we'll have different issues to deal with. We'll have the whole nation to deal with.
Ministers,
we won't have one hospital. We'll have a whole nation.
I have to take a decision. We're in the middle of a crisis. We can't debate forever.
The whole nation comes in. It's not just the hospital.
This is not a debating chamber. You know, you're running a country. Yeah. Minister, what do you want to do?
I'd say that we go with the news that it is the plague.
Minister?
We have to announce plague.
Clearly not. But...
Ministers, we have a majority. It's not unanimous, but you have taken a decision and it will be enacted.
The decision to announce plague is correct. By informing the public about the disease and issuing clear advice on treatment, they will save many lives. The ministers have made their first correct decision. The announcement of plague in Liverpool has added to the tension at St Mark's Hospital. A police cordon has been set up and no one has been allowed to leave. It is now over an hour since the hospital was sealed.
Minister, the situation inside the hospital is pretty tense, and I'd like to connect you to St Mark's as soon as possible.
Well, emotions are starting to run high here. St Mark's Hospital is effectively under siege from the relatives and friends of the patients who are being kept inside that sealed building. People just aren't convinced by the explanation that their loved ones are safe inside there, and they're demanding their immediate release. Meanwhile, those inside, both patients and visitors, are of course desperate to get out. A few minutes ago, I managed to speak to one patient. She's just had a baby and says she's ready to come home. She thinks she and her child are being put at unnecessary risk. But health officials say this is the only way to contain the epidemic.
And Ministers, we've also had contact from a doctor actually inside the hospital.
I've just seen one of the plague patients coughing up blood. It's such a terrible way to die. There's a lot of really scared people here, I'm telling you. It's all right for the IDU staff, we've got proper equipment, but the other wards haven't got anything to stop them catching the plague if it's out there.
There is obviously a good deal of concern going on in the hospital in Liverpool, but I've also got Porton Down on the video link, and it looks as if they may have got something that could be useful in this crisis.
We are currently trialling a vaccine for plague, which seems to be far more successful than previous attempts. Now, at this point, it's only been given to 12 people, but so far we have seen no adverse side effects. We have produced another 1,200 doses for a full-scale field trial, which we must do if the vaccine is to be given a license. However, under the circumstances, I wondered whether you wouldn't prefer us to send the doses straight to the hospital.
This is an unauthorized vaccine, and you have to take a decision, and it's simply this. Will you authorize the use of this unlicensed vaccine? Yes or no?
Is that preventative or just cures it as well? Can we just ask?
Ministers, like most vaccines, the ideal is you take them in 2 shots a week apart, and that gives you antibodies building up and you eventually get protected. So it's a long-term thing. But most vaccines, even if you only had 1 shot, reduce the fatality. And even if you've got the disease, the amount of fatality is reduced if you get a vaccine.
What is the law in using unlicensed vaccine in emergency situations such as this?
I think probably what you should bear in mind is this, is that if we didn't test these vaccines on people, they would never get into production and general use anyway. If you get volunteers, get them to sign a paper, legally, there shouldn't be a problem.
There's been 12 trials, which is nothing. They want 1,200 field trials to prove that it's licensable. The downside, I guess, is that we do this and we create false hope for people.
Or that we kill them, or something. It's unlicensed.
Or that there is, beyond the 12 that's been tested, some very nasty side effects.
Absolutely.
And we precipitate their death.
You're talking about experimenting on human beings. We don't do that.
Give them a chance, ministers.
We don't experiment on human beings. It's completely unacceptable.
But if someone offered me the option, I would take it in that. Would you take it? Would you take it yourself?
This is experimentation. These people are in no fit state to choose.
Okay, if you were in the hospital in that state, would you take the vaccine? I would take the vaccine. I would take anything because there's no other hope.
If we've got, my gut feeling is yes, authorise.
Let's
get it on the ground.
And then see what to do.
Yes, exactly. And let's have
There's
the
no harm in
conversation with
saying
people.
yes.
So what are you saying? Yes, you
I'm
do.
saying yes, authorise.
You do it.
Within certain constraints of, we must have absolute assurance that there will be communication with the people in the hospital to let them know the circumstances
You're saying
of
yes
this
with
choice.
patient
I can
consent.
give you that assurance, Minister.
Comment, I
Yes.
agree with you, and with
Okay.
doctor consent as well. Now, yes.
So you've decided, it appears you've decided. Minister?
You're saying yes with patient consent?
Yes, with patient
It is implied patient consent is what Charles is
What about
saying.
you, Minister? Quickly.
I'll go with the...
Because we'll just authorise it and then they'll
authorise
decide.
it.
You've authorised the use of vaccine.
The minister's decision to authorise the vaccine is correct. As long as it's given with patient consent, it is legal to use an unlicensed vaccine. If the vaccine is issued immediately and proves to work, it will help prevent the spread of the disease. The minister's decision could save many lives.
Ministers, you should also decide how you're going to prioritise the use of those 1,200 doses. Will you give them to the plague victims, everybody else who's in the hospital, or emergency services, some of whom, of course, are outside?
Charles.
I would argue very strongly that you consider giving this to the emergency services. Not only are they your key resource, they're the people that you're going to rely on, and if it develops a situation, you're going to rely on them more and more. Also, morally, they're the people who are putting themselves at risk to deal with these patients, and of course, you'd be asking for volunteers as well.
Do we have an unlimited supply of the vaccine?
No, we have 1,200 shots, Minister, and I think we need to use them rather carefully. Are we going to use them potentially to make the emergency services unwell when we have a chance to test this vaccine on people with the plague?
Can you remind us how many plague victims we've got currently?
Are there new admissions or is it just...
There are new admissions coming in, but Amanda has the correct figures.
The latest figures, ministers, are 87 of cases of pneumonic plague, 28 are now in a serious condition, and we have 5 deaths.
Can I make a recommendation here? Sort of process of logic. This is a high-risk strategy we've employed, I think probably rightly, but we don't know for sure the effect of this drug. Okay. We have 87 victims and we have 1,200 serum. That's the serum. We will, if you like, trial it on the victims, given they have a 50% mortality rate anyhow. If that is successful, and we hope it will be, then we have the option then to deploy it to the others in the hospital and the emergency services.
I suppose they're so ill anyway that if they get more ill, we don't really know that
I said the
they got
upside we
worse.
said was if this might save
if they
their
get cured.
lives, that's great, but if not, we are potentially damaging healthy people's lives. So
we've established that I agree with you.
We're in a sort of guinea pig syndrome, I'm afraid.
Exactly. If the vaccine is available on a patient knowledge basis and it's likely to save lives, I think it could be given to
the 87 with the symptoms, which is what Andrew's saying, which is a good point.
OK, Ministers, this is decision time because there are important developments that I need to get you to concentrate on. So, what is it to be, Minister?
I would agree with Andrew. I would test it on the plague victims for the moment.
Use the vaccine. Minister?
Use the vaccine on the plague victims.
Minister?
I say go to the plague victims.
Ministers, I think you've taken a decision and it will be enacted.
The Minister's decision to give the vaccine to the plague victims is not correct. As the Ministers were told, the vaccine would take too long to work for it to be an effective cure for patients who already have the plague. But it can help prevent people from catching the plague. The correct decision is to issue the vaccines to the emergency services personnel, who are the most important people to protect.
Britain is in the grip of a plague epidemic. 5 people have now died. Over 80 people in the Liverpool area are being held in isolation wards and treated for plague. Among the sick are hospital staff exposed before the deadly disease was identified. Inside St Mark's Hospital, over 1,000 people have been sealed in to prevent the spread of the disease to the rest of the city. There is evidence of increasing fear and desperation among those being detained. This was the scene earlier, as one patient, a young man, was arrested by police in chemical protection suits after smashing a ground floor window in a bid to escape from the quarantined hospital.
Ministers, there are dramatic developments at the hospital, and I've got the incident commander via video link.
The situation is that we've got an angry crowd threatening to break out of the hospital. The doors are locked, but my men on the door say they won't hold for much longer. There are over 200 people. I only have 40 officers on the scene, and only 15 or 16 of them are wearing chemical protection suits. I do have a number of armed response units standing by.
Can we just get the army to support the police and sealing this hospital?
Ministers,
it's clearly getting out of control.
I hope you understood what you just heard there. There are people who are trying to now break out of that hospital. You have to decide, are you going to arrest those people who are trying to break out? Are you going to try and use riot control measures? Or will you authorise, if necessary, the use of firearms?
Well, let's have a think about what it is that we're trying to do. We have an epidemic, we are trying to save lives, and we're trying to contain it. That's the core thing that we're trying to do. With authorised vaccines, we're trying to make sure that it is not spread, but obviously people are desperate. So is there anything, can we ask for maybe some communications guidance?
What about these options, which is what we have to use?
Let's get to that once we have some more information.
Can we possibly, Amanda, just in terms of, we're obviously not communicating very well inside that hospital.
The facts are being communicated that people inside there, even if they're well, they know that there's a 50% chance they'll catch this thing and they'll die. They're the facts. You can't whitewash that.
I've got to interrupt because I think you should listen to the police communications network right on the front line by the hospital.
They are glass, repeat, glass doors. We've only got 2 officers holding them back, but I don't want to move our men from the outer cordon.
How long do you think you can hold them there?
2 minutes maybe, 5 minutes at most.
Ministers, you know the options I've told you. You know what the situation is on the ground.
We need to contain people
What
in the
are you
hospital.
going to do?
That's our #1 priority.
It sounds to me like this is a riot and therefore it calls for riot control. We can't use firearms in civilised society.
Sick people.
Why is the army not in there in terms of that?
We have the police on the ground, we've been told.
But it's not adequate, as we could see, because they were overstretched.
We can't switch the army on and off. It takes a couple of hours for me to get the army somewhere. They've got to get briefed by the
Can we get the army?
Riot control sounds like such a nice, comfortable expression. I mean, I'd quite like Charles to explain what this will involve. This will involve people being attacked with batons. They'll use everything they can short of firepower to stop these people. We're talking about women and children.
It's not going to look good, Minister. I mean, it's clear. We're talking about the full range of riot control equipment, batons, CS spray, shields and so on. But there's also a baton gun unit. They have baton guns, which are rubber bullets, plastic bullets, as you've been used in Ireland many times. On the mainland, they've never been used in a riot control situation, which is, again, since you are sitting here while the commander basically is passing the buck to you on this.
Right. Do we have, just from what he said on the ground, the local Guy, are there sufficient resources to deal with this?
No, there aren't, Minister.
They're not.
And certainly not when it comes to if that door breaks, and of course it may do very shortly. The point is that we haven't got protected officers.
We have a development on the front line at the hospital. Connect you right to it.
They're out! They're out! Looks like a lot of people. They're running down the slope towards the barriers. Stand by to engage. Stand by!
OK, these are potentially infected people.
We have to get the army in ASAP.
No, hang on, no.
The army aren't there,
Forget army. Forget army.
You didn't deploy them. They're not
With emergency services, can we arrest peaceably? Do we pose a high risk to civilian and to policemen in terms of passing on infections?
They don't have suits. 15 or so have protective suits. And also, if you arrest, you saw there, you're taking away 2 people probably per arrested person.
But they're not on the streets yet. I mean, we've still got the police cordon. I have to tell you, Minister, these are walking time bombs.
Absolutely.
I'm afraid you've got to authorise all possible measures to stop them, or this plague will be all over the place.
OK, they are within the secure area. I think what we have to do is, I'm not interested in using firearms on sick people. I'm interested in getting people back into the hospital.
Riot control, therefore, controlling them back in, pushing them back in.
Take a look at this. This is important
pushing
footage.
Them back
I
in.
think you should see this. Have a look at this.
Well, we have a very serious situation developing here. As you can see behind me, an angry group of patients have managed to force their way right up to this barrier. This is the edge of the cordoned-off quarantine area. They're determined to get out of there. The police are equally determined to keep them in there. I can see that riot vans are arriving with police reinforcements. There are armed police on the scene, and we're now being told to move away from here for our own safety. We'll bring you more on this as soon as we can.
Look, guys, it's a riot. We have to use riot control. Arrest will take too long.
We all agree with riot control.
And also arrest essentially affects other people.
We all agree, riot control, all agree.
I suspect somewhere in emergency legislation there's probably the use of firearms, but it's not something we can countenance.
No.
And what happens if, just to make you consider, Ministers, what happens if these people escape? What are you going to do if that barrier collapses? It looks like it will.
What is being done? We had originally asked for extra resources to get there.
Am I wrong in this? I think you took a decision, didn't you?
Yeah.
I think we've gone for riot control.
Yeah, we said riot
control. We're continuing to debate, but I think
why
yes,
are we
we
debating riot control?
Ministers, you've taken a decision. You're all in agreement on this, and that decision will be enacted immediately.
But very clearly, with no use of lethal force, with extra resources to be brought in, and with the officers told that this is about containment and not about attack.
Minister, I will pass on that you have authorised the use of riot control measures.
The ministers must now wait to see if the riot control measures they have authorised will be effective.
We must go over again to the police who are at the scene just outside the hospital.
7 or 8 of the rioters at the front of the crowd have been hit. One man is bleeding from the head, but I can't allow anyone to deal with him at the moment.
Are the battle rams working?
When we fire, people move back from the barriers, but they're not going back inside. We can't hold them for long. Have we received the order to fire with live ammunition?
Negative. That order has not been received. Continue using battle rounds only, unless I tell you otherwise.
You made a decision to use riot control measures. Question for you now is, was that enough? You're going to stick by it?
I think we're presuming that's going to fail, aren't we? The use of firearms, massively inflammatory words, but that doesn't mean to suggest that we're going to kill people. We can fire into the air as a deterrent. Gunshots going off will, without question, it halts people in their tracks. I think the point made earlier...
Minister, please don't labour under that disillusion. That's not the case. If you order the police to fire, they're not going to suddenly open fire en masse, but what they will do, they will have the authority to shoot those people. Police aren't trained to open fire in the air.
If 1 or 2, 3 people are shot, is that likely to quell the crowd?
It may well do. It may well do.
I think it'll make it worse.
I really don't believe in that.
I would do if I was leaving the hospital and I saw somebody else doing the same shot.
People are getting shot around you would desist immediately. You would stop.
If I saw people
You would stop
around,
and you
you
would retrench.
I want you to be crystal clear in the advice that I'm giving you here. The point is this, that if you rely purely on riot control methods, they are far from guaranteed to prevent this cordon being broken. You can see what's happening here. Each of these people may be infected, they may not be infected. If they were carrying weapons, you wouldn't have any hesitation, I'm sure, Maybe that's a way you should perhaps think about it.
We must go over to the police again at the scene at the hospital.
We have a man down. I think he's been hit by a bottle. They're running along the barriers looking for a way through. They're going to find one any minute. We can't be everywhere at once.
Just do your best. I'm still awaiting orders. Hold that cordon.
The balance of probabilities, they're going to breach that barrier and potentially run riot in the city, infecting many other people. That's what we're being told.
It's a possibility, yes, Minister.
The area, the barrier, is immediately accessible to the rest of the general public.
The barrier is the final cordon, yes, Minister.
Yeah. Once they're out of that, they're free.
And it's not going to last, it's clear.
Well, we have to make it last. We are not going to start...
There must be some way to control this
crowd. It is not beyond the wit of this government and these people
can I just urge you to deal with the situation as it is, not as you wish it would be. That barrier is not going to last. We have a resource issue. The army could have been called in earlier. They weren't. We have to accept that fact. Please, can we have some clear guidance?
But Minister, this is a really tough decision. But many of those people are going to die anyway. Do you wish to infect the rest of the country by letting them out, or are you going to contain this situation by using all necessary means?
How can we contain it by just shooting them down?
Well, I have to tell you, if somebody is running down the street and gets shot down, he will not go and infect the rest of the neighbourhood.
Have the police used firearms in a crisis situation? Obviously not exactly like this.
Police have never in this country, certainly on the mainland, opened fire on rioters, but this situation never existed. We need a decision.
It's never ever happened previously.
We've never had an outbreak of pneumonic plague, Minister. We need a decision.
In terms of the resources right now, in terms of the resources, we are all wishing that we were deploying more people.
Ministers, I have a question for you. Are any of you, are you prepared to use firearms in this situation?
No.
Minister?
Yes, I am.
Minister?
I am prepared to use firearms as a disincentive, but not as a direct, but not to shoot people.
That's not an option because of the police on the ground. You simply cannot hinder them in that way by saying, oh, can we shoot, can't we shoot? They have to have authority one way or another.
What other resources do we have in terms of helicopters or any other resources available to support?
What do you mean helicopters, Minister?
Have we got any other ability
a crowd
to
control?
bring in?
This is basic crowd control. That's what I don't understand.
Control is what we talked about, Minister, and it didn't work.
Of putting barricades so they don't contaminate the rest.
Impractical.
That's
you can
what
see
we've got. Can help us with.
The army aren't there, Minister. Please understand me. You must deal with the situation as it is now, not as it may be in an hour's time.
As we debate this, we're about to release a whole set of potential plague-infected people on the community. You've got to use all measures to stop.
What about the use of there are other incremental steps. We've gone from 1 to 100 in terms of attacking this population.
Ministers, you've been discussing this. It may be too late.
They're out! They've broken through! They're all over the fucking place! They're getting away! That's it! We've lost them!
How many?
I don't know, 50, maybe more! I don't believe it!
Okay, well, in that situation, it was either shoot someone or let them escape, and we've
you have to shoot a lot of people. I mean, to be honest with you.
We haven't made the decision.
Well, we didn't make a decision, and the default is now that people have escaped.
Ministers, you have failed to control the situation in Liverpool. You have, in fact, made your last decision, and your time in charge of the country is over.
The minister's decision only to use riot control measures was not correct. When it became clear that the police and the public would be in danger, the correct decision was to authorize the use of firearms. But in spite of being warned 6 times that the police cordon would not hold, the ministers did not change their minds. Although it would be unprecedented for the police to open fire on a crowd of unarmed civilians, under proposed new legislation, the Secretary of State may enforce any provision which he thinks necessary to prevent loss of life in such an emergency. During this crisis, the ministers made 2 correct decisions and 5 that were wrong. The consequences of a large number of people infected with pneumonic plague dispersing into the city of Liverpool would be devastating. With 75,000 people infected and 49,000 dead, the cost to the economy would be in the region of £56 billion.
Ministers, I'd like to take you forward from now, 6 weeks forward, to see how this story would have been reported on the basis of the decisions that you took.
Britain's plague epidemic could have been prevented, according to the director of the World Health Organization. In a report published today, the government is heavily criticised for not acting quickly enough to stop the disease spreading. Ministers were responsible for a catalogue of errors. They didn't deploy troops quickly enough, failed to enforce quarantines, and exposed health workers to unnecessary risks. So far, 49,000 people have died across the United Kingdom. The report concludes that prompt, effective action to deal with the initial outbreak could have kept the death toll to below 100.
Ministers, during the hours when you were running this country during a time of crisis, you had advisors who you could talk to, and they're going to give you an assessment of how you did.
Ministers, you seem to think that the military was some magic resource that you could turn on and off, redirect wherever you wanted to at a moment's notice. Think about it. We've got to call them out, we've got to put them in vehicles, we've got to bring them to you. You can't do it in a moment's notice. I mean, taking the sealing of the hospital. You wanted to contain this disease. You understood that. But what you ended up suggesting was that you were going to make another hospital, which presumably would have infection. If you'd brought in the army early, if you'd sealed early, things would not have got out of control in the way they did.
Ministers, you were very humane in your decision-making process, perhaps a little too humane. You were also very honest when it came to making that decision about coming clean on the plague. There were really strong operational reasons for not doing that. But you chose honesty, you chose not to lie, and I'm not quite sure how many real ministers would have taken that decision.
Ministers, clearly you had an obligation to save the lives of the people in that hospital, but you had a wider responsibility to the community as a whole, whose lives are also in your hands. Had you authorised those officers to open fire, more lives in the long run would have been saved.
Ministers, one thing you know now, that this was a containable outbreak. How do you feel about that, hearing that now?
I just feel, totally that we just dealt with it so inadequately. I think I just feel dreadful. We made all the wrong decisions.
How do you feel?
I think it was a classic case of the democratic process not working in a crisis. I probably listened too much to my colleagues and was swayed by their judgment in trying to act in a consensus. I did think we were taking one or two critically wrong decisions and probably should have been more forceful in getting my point of view across.
Minister?
I do feel that we made the most humane choices consistently. We showed that we were not able to condemn people there and then to death in a number of occasions, and that was the critical decision we couldn't make.
Well, Ministers, over the past few hours, you had to take a series of extraordinary decisions when Britain was faced with an outbreak of pneumonic plague. You had to decide whether to tell the country there was a plague. In fact, you had to decide whether to open fire on unarmed civilians. Let's hope no ministers for real have to take decisions like that. And now, Ministers, you are free to leave the Crisis Command Centre.
I feel so relieved that, that this is basically not my day job.
Right now, just after it, it's very hard for me to know whether I was effective or not at persuading people.
I think perhaps I was ready to take the tougher decisions, and they were took the higher kind of moral ground.
For me personally, it was, did I make the decisions based on who I am and the values I hold? And I feel pretty clear that I did.
Could I run the country? It's a challenge I would absolutely relish.
I think I could.
Oh, I think I definitely couldn't run the country. I think this should get me nowhere near the country. No.